The first time my baby cried, I felt like a failure. I fed him, I changed him, I swaddled him, I tried everything, and yet he cried. My son's a little older now, but that feeling like I failed hasn't gone away. Whenever he's crying or upset, questions swirl around my head. Why can't I fix this? What am I missing? What am I doing wrong? Today, we're talking about something that might completely shift how you hear your child's tears. Welcome to Mom with Dr. Tash. Welcome back, Dr. Tash.
Hi, Melody. How are you?
I am amazing.
Excellent.
And today we're unpacking your article, which can be found on Mums at the Table website. And an amazing article might be an understatement. It really had a profound impact on me. I wish I read it when my son was born. It would have made sitting with the crying so much easier. Basically, you're positioning that just because your child is crying, it doesn't necessarily mean they have a problem that needs to be solved. That crying is a need in itself. Normally, I would say go read the article to find out what Dr. Tash means, but I find that it's such an important message to share. So if you can give it to us right here, right now.
Yep, absolutely. This is a big concept, so I'm going to take a few minutes to unpack it properly. I think it's really important to start by saying that there are different types of crying. So some crying is a signal that something needs fixing: hunger, pain, tiredness, safety, connection, a medical or health issue. And in those moments, our job is to respond and to meet that need. But that sometimes also the cry itself is a need. And that can feel really counterintuitive, especially in an early parenting, like parenthood period and journey. I'm going to tell you a story, but for me as a first time mum, but I felt the urgency, this intense urgency to fix the crying as quickly as possible. If my child was crying, I was immediately trying to figure out what's the issue? What do I need to do? Okay, cool. I need to soothe you. And if I couldn't soothe him, I felt like I failed, like I was doing it wrong. And that was a story running in my head. But
My
here's the
story
shit. Yeah. I'm sure we're not alone too. And I think part of it, like for me, honestly, was I'd been very successful in work and always done lots. And I'd done that through to-do lists, checklists, fixing it. Okay, there's a problem, got to do this. What do I need to do next? Da, da, da. And I tried to take that similar approach to parenthood and it did not work. And it's because it's a very different set of skills needed to approach it. And that was a big shift. And some of this stuff didn't just come to the forefront because I was so busy looking for the problem. But anyway, so going back to it, if you've checked the obvious things, baby is fed, nappy is clean, they're not too hot, not too cold, there's no signs of illness, and that's really important. They've had connection and they still seem fussy. First of all, that does not mean that you have failed. And I need to be really clear here: in newborns and in early infants, especially, any sort of persistent, unusual crying is always necessary for a thoughtful assessment and review. If something feels unusual, it feels severe, it feels different, or it doesn't sit right with you as a parent, that absolutely warrants a medical review. And that is really, really important, because we're not talking about, like, think of any sort of type of crying as maybe that's my child's need. There are significant medical causes that must be excluded in a significantly crying baby. And the other thing I've noted, and that, sorry, that should not be underspoken. And I think it's really, really, really important that people turn away and say, if it feels wrong, if it sits wrong, if there's something that's not right, if it's persistent and they just don't seem to settle, get it checked. Please, please don't sit on a crying baby that might have something wrong. But the medical causes have been excluded. You've put all that aside, your child's needs are met. What I've personally noticed, that this sort of crying often shows up at the end of the day, more in the evenings after too much stimulation, or not enough sleep, or lack of stimulation, when the naps are all over the place. It's that overtired sort of crying, overwhelmed sort of crying that says, I don't even know what it is that I need sort of cry.
Witching
And
hour cry.
pardon?
The witching hour cry.
Yeah, absolutely. But here's the thing, it's intense while it's happening, but there's resolution. So after the cry, they're visibly more settled, or they fall into this deep sort of peaceful sleep. And so that's why I say any sort of persistent, like, there's just no resolution sort of crying at any point in time, please get it checked. That sort of rings alarm bells as something might be wrong. It's the different sort of cry, that persistent, escalating, concerning in your gut always needs that medical review. So developmentally, we know. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just thinking, yeah, I can look back now and yes, you can tell the difference. You're like, there is nothing wrong with you. Why are you still crying? Kind of
Mm,
cry.
yeah.
I think that's what
Um,
you're trying to say, not the
yes.
not the
Yeah.
oh,
But
what is
also after you do this, when you give them the opportunity to, an important aspect is it resolves. It's
Yep.
not indefinite, persistent
Yeah.
crying and irritability.
Yep.
That always needs a medical review, and I think it's really important that if in doubt, you go get it checked. So if you're sitting there and you go, I'm not sure, could this be or could it not be? If it could be medical, get it checked. Please get it checked. It's safer to get checked 5 times than to not get
Mhm.
checked. Okay, so developmentally, we also know that crying peaks in early infancy and that babies have immature nervous systems. And crying is one of the primary tools that they use to express stress and
Mhm.
sensory overload. Now, I do want to be careful. I want to be careful here. In older children and in adults, we know that emotional expression in safe relationship helps to settle the body. And most of us have experienced that. And we've seen
Mhm.
some sort of biology within that. You have a big cry, and afterwards, you feel lighter, you feel calmer. With infants, we do not have that same biological mapping mapped out, but we do, as in like distinctively mapped out in terms of the documentation. But we do know this, that when distress is met with calm, attuned presence, the nervous system, and repeatedly, the nervous system settles over time, and that's co regulation. So, what we're talking about here is secure attachment, attachment research and developmental research sort of side of things, rather than the cry itself is I don't want people to take away that crying itself is some sort of magic stress release hormone like switch. It Crying in the wrong circumstances can actually be very distressing, and can actually increase the stress, not decrease. But what we're talking about is when a child's distress is allowed, supported, held with connection, that their body can move through it and come back to the calm. And so I still want to be very clear with what I'm not saying. I'm not talking about leaving a baby to cry alone. I'm not talking about uh, the okay, you need to have a cry, so I'm going to leave you here. I'll come back. I'll see you later. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about crying in the presence of connection, crying whilst being held, crying whilst being emotionally accompanied. This is not cried out, it's co regulation. So I just want to be clear about that. It's saying, I'm here, you can cry. I'm not afraid of your tears, even if you are just a little. Um, in the article, I mentioned how my first child, I'd been trying to fix the cry. And if I'm honest, I was not an emotional anchor to my son at all. I was so desperately trying to settle him, fix it, get like, make you better, as though any emotional state other than settled was a problem. Um, and let's be honest, it actually did not do well for my mental health. I remember feeling triggered all the time. And in truth, he would have fed off that anxiety as well, which would have just escalated the entire environment. And so sometimes we can get into that state, especially as first time mums. Any parent can, but especially as first time mums, where it's just this vicious cycle where it's all going wrong. And if that's happening, I would just say pause, get help. If you're a first time mum in that sort of state, postnatal depression is so much more common than I think people appreciate or realize it, and it can be more insidious than people realize as well. Please get help. It can be really, 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 really hard. So just pausing to sort of add that in, really, really important. Get help. There's nothing shameful about doing it. I know I needed that, and I'm a professional. So between my first and second children, I read the book The Aware Baby by Dr. Aletha Salter, and she's a developmental psychologist and the founder of the Aware Parenting approach, which has a strong emphasis on sort of attachment, emotional expression, and this idea that crying can serve as a stress release process when supported with connection. And that actually really helped me sort of grasp this concept, in the way I now understand it now. And so by the time I had my second child, I had a completely different understanding of things. And I'll be honest, it was liberating. It did wonders for my mental health because I no longer saw his tears as a reflection of my failure. I was able to separate my identity from his crying. And once I stopped interpreting every tear as something I'd done wrong, I wasn't afraid to sit with them anymore. And I remember one night when my second was just a few months old, we'd been at a friend's house. After dinner, he was not so happy. And I'm not talking about the full blown crying. I'm talking about that fussing sort of state. It's like, everything's just a bit much. Nothing's really going to make me happy right now. Like, I'm cranky, for lack of a better term. Like, it's not I'm full blown. It's just like, grr, for lack of a better term. And so I took him to a quiet room, held him upright in my arms, and just said to him, "Okay, I'm here. If you need to cry, you can cry." And he did. Loud, angry, intense crying for about half an hour on and off. Um, I didn't try and fix it. I didn't shush. I didn't bounce. I didn't try and make it better. I just sat with him. And for those that are going, how on earth did you do that? Remember, what I just learnt before made the difference. My child's tears is not my failure. And so I wasn't scared of him having big feelings. I could sit with those big feelings, understanding that this wasn't about my identity. My job in this moment is just to be here with you. Um, and afterwards, he was calm, peaceful. It was literally like nothing had happened. And trust me, if you ask the friends that were in our presence at that time, everybody heard it and they all saw it and they all commented on, he's really happy now. It's like, yeah, he had let go of what he needed to, and he felt good after that. And so crying doesn't always mean that something's wrong. Sometimes it just means their nervous system's overwhelmed and they need somewhere safe to process it. And our role isn't always to stop it. Sometimes our role is just to stay.
It's interesting because what you just said reminded me of a story with my son that just happened not too long ago. He and this is where it's going to be bordering on the medical side of things as well, in the sense that he had actually fallen from quite a significant height a day or two before. Um, and he hurt his back and ribs quite badly. But, medically he wasn't in the pink of health, but it wasn't that, he needed surgery or anything like that. He was just
Mm.
in a fair bit of pain. But he was in good spirits. He was still mobile all day. So he was okay in that sense. But that night, so 2 nights later, he lost it. He could not stop crying. He was telling me how much pain he was in, which, yeah, I don't doubt. But that night, something different happened. I don't know why, because this is not normal for me. Something just tweaked that it wasn't the pain that was bothering him as much as that he wanted a release. I don't recognize this that easily. I stayed with him. I fought my urges to, fix the problem, to get annoyed, to tell him to be quiet. I miraculously, I stayed calm. I just sat there. I told him I understood how he felt. I was there. Nothing more. I just said, I'm here. I gave him permission. I was like, if you really need to scream, just scream into the pillow so no one can hear you, and just cry. I asked him if I could do anything as well. And so, yeah, medically, his needs were met in that sense. And just said, just cry. He cried bitterly. It felt like hours that he did that. But he settled down and then he just went to sleep. Um, yeah, I don't know how, but I got it right.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, how do you tell the difference? So that I say is an anomaly. I got it right. I realize that crying is not a problem to solve. But how do you know? How do you actually tell the difference?
So, pausing for a second before I answer your question, just acknowledging something about your son's story. Um, what you did was amazing, letting him have that moment to just cry, because what you're actually describing is how you prevent things becoming a trauma response. So when someone experiences something scary, for instance, like, I've hurt myself, I'm a bit scared of this experience, when they're allowed to experience the emotion at the time and work through and process whatever it is they need to, and the child's body will know best. But when they're allowed to do that, so for him, he needed to have a big cry bitterly, just let it all out. They are they no longer connect that with that event becoming so terrifying in the future. And so often that's how some of our trauma responses can occur, because, and very important to say, I'm not criticizing like anyone whose child's had a trauma response. My children have had trauma responses, and I know this. That's sometimes why I've seen back and gone, oh dear, that was a trauma response, like because like they didn't process something fully at the time. But when you work through it, then you can prevent that. Different topic for how you work through traumas, totally different topic for working through them, but just acknowledging that that actually can be really powerful because I've had a big event. I was scared by this injury that I've had. And rather than being afraid to come back to it next time, because he's had that chance to let it out and work through it, he's far less likely to be afraid of it coming back the second time. Whereas when we suppress that or we can't quite get it out, it internalizes and they don't even realize it's happening, but it becomes, I'm afraid of the trigger. I'm afraid of the trigger that made me feel this way. And so well done. Amazing job, because it really makes a big difference in terms of that setting.
You got
Back
lucky.
to your actual question. Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, I'm just saying I got lucky.
Yeah. Yep, and we do. And I honestly, even when I look back at the times where I've like not like I helped my child to work through what could have been a potential trauma response. It was only in hindsight I realized, oh dear, glad I did that because that could have been. And the reason I realized that was because I hadn't for my other child, and he has a trauma response to that particular trigger. So that's the only reason I realized. So we can get lucky. It's there is no criticism to any parent whose children have trauma responses to things. No one's perfect, and even if you know it, you can still miss it at times. It's not always obvious. Back to your actual question, telling the difference. When do you know is the problem? When is it emotional release? You're right. It's not easy to tell the difference. And especially when we're exploring that idea for the first time, as I've said before, it's clunky, it's difficult, it doesn't come naturally. And with babies in particular, I think it's really, really important that I would always begin by assuming there's a problem to solve. You've got to go through the checklist. Is a feed due? Have I changed their nappy? Do I check their clothing? What's the temperature like in the room? Have I looked for things like hair tourniquets, which if people aren't aware of it, you can actually get hair tied around your digits, which can cut them off if you're not careful. So if you've got a child that's seeming really distressed, you've got to look for, is there a medical thing around? Is there something that I've got to fix? Offer some presence and connection. And if you're concerned that something feels unusual or worrying, always get that medical review. We're going through the baby sort of checklist. And the baby, especially because they can't tell you, they can't give you more guidance of going, this is exactly what's going on, or this is how it is. So it's really, really, really important for the baby. Run through the checklist. Am I checking off everything? That comes first. And then you're not mind reading. So you can still be attuned. You've done through everything. We're doing the best we can. You can never be completely certain what's going on inside that other person. And so it becomes a bit of a back and forth dance. You respond, you observe, you adjust, you see how things are going. And over time, as you practice, you get better at recognizing these patterns and you start to see, this is the end of the day overwhelm, or this is the pain that needs addressing. And it's not about getting everything perfectly right every time. It's just about staying responsive and being willing to be reflective and self-assess and reassess.
One of the things that came up, right, is that, I say I got lucky, and it's purely because of the fact that whenever my son cries, I'm not calm. I feel triggered pretty much all the time. I guess the question is why? Why is it that when our kids cry, we just feel so triggered, so activated?
Yeah, I totally get it. I really do. When your child is crying, it hits differently. It's not theoretical, it's not theory, it's visceral. You feel it. And there are several layers to this. One layer is that many of us see our role of a parent as a protector. We want to shield our children from adversity. We don't want them to suffer. And so when they cry, something in us says, make it stop, because stopping it feels like we're protecting them. But if we can shift our understanding and realize that crying within a safe environment is not harmful, but can actually be what they need, and in part how resilience is built, then it helps to change that internal narrative with us. We're no longer failing them by allowing their tears. We're actually helping them to learn that they can move through these hard feelings and come out the other side. And so by changing our approach to crying in terms of our internal narrative on what crying is, that can really help in one aspect of things. doesn't fix everything, every aspect of what you said, but it can make a really big difference. So that's one layer. Another layer is our own story. How were your tears treated growing up? Were they welcomed? Were they ignored? Were they dismissed? Were they shamed? Were they frowned upon? Because if crying wasn't safe for you as a child, your nervous system may still register crying as something dangerous, overwhelming, unacceptable. And so when your son cries, it doesn't just activate your protective instinct, it actually activates your own unresolved experiences to protect you as well. In terms of not protecting him, I mean, now it's protecting you because crying was something that needed to be like, that was dangerous. It wasn't safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because you get
Um,
yelled at for crying.
yeah, yeah. It's how do I protect
Mhm.
me now? And then it can be even more complicated than that as well. So this is another layer again that sometimes this is, talking back to our children and why it's more triggering for them, for us to hear them than us. Sometimes what triggered their tears triggered you too. And so now we're not just talking about our own narrative, not just talking about our own story. We're also talking about the fact that, whatever just happened triggered you as well. And maybe you're feeling guilty because of what you did to contribute to the situation. And or what they've done has irritated you in some way or form. And so all that element makes it harder to stay calm too. And so I think it's really important to say this is hard. This is not just a walk in the park easy, but the better we understand, the more reflective, the more we keep coming back to things, we are learning slowly, slowly, and getting better at comprehending and understanding. We get better. I always bring up the infant learning to walk analogy. The more we practice, the more steady we become on our feet. And I think that, yeah, when this information is new, remember that infant learning to walk analogy. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It takes practice. There's lots of falls, lots of bumps, lots of getting it wrong, and there is nothing wrong with that.
I really like what you said because, the amount of times when, like, I know that I shouldn't get triggered. I know I shouldn't get irritated by my son's crying, but I do. And the amount of times that I ask, what is wrong with me? Why am I reacting like this? And then having hear you say, it's just your body trying to protect you from your past experiences. It feels a little bit, there's a little bit of more grace that I can give myself. And yeah, it encourages me. Um and I have been on this journey for a while. I want to speak to the whole practice thing. I have been on this journey for a while now. I probably learned about, this concept a few years back, and I still don't get it right. But I need to speak to the fact that yes, it feels easier. It's still not
Mhm.
easy. It's still not easy. There's no I cannot say it feels easy, and it's been years, but it feels easier.
Yeah. I think it's really important for parents that are going through this experience, especially if they're going through in the early stages or even like yourself that have been doing it for a few years. I think it's important to realize and recognize as well that it never goes away. And I say that because it doesn't matter how good you get, that internal voice or discomfort feel will always be there. It gets softer, it gets more quiet, it gets less prominent in the forefront with more experience and with time, but it's always there and that's okay. The goal isn't to make it go away because that's a part of like our history is never going to go away. Our past will never disappear. And so in a way it's actually embracing ourselves and embracing our past and going, that's a part of who I am. That's okay. I am on this journey and this is where I'm at, and that's all right. Like, that's who I've been, that's who I am, and it's a reminder of my past, and that's okay. And we all have them. They're slightly different, but we all have them. And so I think it's important to recognize and realize that this work doesn't make it disappear. It doesn't make it like it's never existed. It's always hard. It just gets less hard the better you get at it and the more practice you do with it.
And, in the instances where it's gets back to being hard, where we just
Mm.
cannot tolerate it, we're just feeling too anxious, too angry, too overwhelmed. Do
Yep.
you have an advice on what we do then?
Yeah, so I think firstly, understanding that in those moments, this isn't a parenting failure, this is your nervous system talking. Your body is going into like when it's talking at this moment, it's saying it might be anxiety, anger, panic, overwhelm. It's trying to tell you something. And I think we've said it before, but before you can hold your child's feelings, it's so important to acknowledge what's going on with us. And so start with you. It is not selfish to work on you before you respond to your child. If you're flooded, safety comes first. If you've got a baby, for instance, it's okay to just put your baby in a safe place and walk away for a minute. That is far better than trying to deal with it in a moment where you're flooded. No one is their best self when they're flooded, ever. No one is ever their best self in a flooded moment. And so I think it's okay to say, I need a moment, I'm coming back. With the older child, obviously, that's you're telling them what you're doing. Take the time to pause. Pause is not abandonment. Pausing and leaving your child alone for the moment, even if they are crying in their room by themselves for a second while you take a pause, is not abandoning them. It is you regulating yourself so that you can be the emotional anchor that they need. And that is okay. That is important because let's be honest, if you didn't take that moment, what are you going to be? You're going to be the fuel on the fire that helps make that go from, a simmering bonfire or simmering flame to a bit of an exploding bonfire. And so recognize where you're at. It is okay to acknowledge where your body is at and to tend to your own needs. You're not failing your child when you do that. You're actually doing what they need the most because then if you can come back and be more regulated, you're being that anchor that they need, even if it takes time. Second thing to that, though, is if crying really consistently feels intolerable, then that's important to be curious about as well, because that might mean that your nervous system may be carrying far more than you realize or appreciate. And you might actually need some more help to work through this. And if that is the case, that is really, really, really important to acknowledge and to listen to. This is hard work, this is growth work for us as much as it is for them. And many of us would have great benefit from working through this journey with professional assistance as well. So there is nothing wrong with seeing a GP, counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist, and working through our struggles and these experiences with a safe place for us to process this information.
I'm going to change tack a little bit and come back to, this whole crying is a need.
Mhm.
And in your article, you write about this broken cookie phenomenon, where it's an over-the-top response to something seemingly inconsequential, like, a broken cookie is really the result of built-up tension from all sorts of things, right? Especially for older kids, I think, because you know that the build-up tension, you could probably try to recognize what caused the tension. Do you then let them cry? Do you figure out the tension, try to fix the tension? What do you actually do?
Yeah, great question. So the response feels completely disproportionate. First thing I recommend you do in almost any circumstance is pause. Internally remind yourself this is not about this moment. They're having a hard time. Because that pause really matters. Without it, often our instinct is something like, seriously, it's just a cookie. Like, um, and so taking that pause can actually shift how we're fundamentally viewing it, what lens we're seeing it through. We're seeing, okay, my child is struggling with something. It's not about the cookie, it's about more than this situation. And so pause first. And then safety, physical, emotional. If they're escalating at the dinner table, they don't have time to process it in front of they're escalating the table. You don't have to process it in front of everyone. The whole family does not have to sit through this big storm. So you can say, I can see you're having a hard time. Let's go somewhere a little bit quieter together. But in that storm, it's not about analyzing the buildup. That's not the time. Their thinking brain is not fully online at this moment, and it's not the time to try and process exactly what's caused this. What is it what is triggered this broken cookie phenomenon? That's not the point. The first place is to be the anchor. You need a moment to steady yourself. Take it. Then come back, help steady them through that storm if you can. And then later, not during the storm, that's when you do the reflection. And that reflection can be yourself, but can be with them too. You can think first, like, was it a long day for my child? Was it not enough sleep? Too many transitions? Did something happen? Or you can even ask them, it's like, oh, I can see it was a really hard day for you. Like, do you want to talk about your day? Do you want to talk about it? Like, just something open-ended, something curious that just allows them to lead the narrative. They might not know, like we said in our last episode, they might not know. And that's also okay. And so it's just providing that space and opportunity to try and work through it. So it's hold the feeling now, reflect and adjust later. And even if you know what it is you think triggered it, at that moment, fixing it isn't the issue. What they need in that particular second is actually the reason to let the release out. So if that's what they need, tend their needs first. When everything's calm and steady and they're feeling better later, then you can work through the process. Yeah, I've actually had many parents ask on sort of practical guidance about some of this stuff. So I'm actually working on putting something together on how to sit with big feelings in real life. And so if that's something that people are looking for in terms of more support, you can join my email list if you like. I don't send things much, maybe a monthly, but that's where I'll let people know first when I do get it ready.
Oh, that'd be amazing. I think I'll sign up too. And I'll put the link into the show notes just for anyone wondering. Yeah, it's a big what you said reminded me of what you shared. I think probably in our first podcast about the whole fire alarm thing in the building. So it's about when there's a fire alarm, let's not try to fix anything. Let's just try to address the issue and get them out to safety. And so just to hold their emotions back then.
Absolutely. I think that I love that analogy and I hope people can hold on to it because it makes it so tangible as to why you don't try and teach in that moment. But yeah, when the fire alarm's going off, let them evacuate the building first. When things are calm, then deal with it later.
So it's almost time to wrap up now. Could you hit us with one takeaway you'd like us to remember?
Yeah. Your child does not need you to eliminate every hard feeling. It's okay. But if you can, they need you to try and be steady enough to stay with them while they process through it. And if you need a moment before you can do that, that's also okay.
And I guess it's a reminder that tears aren't proof that we as parents are failing, or necessarily indicative that there's a problem that we as parents need to fix. I guess sometimes they're proof as well that our children feel safe enough to release it in our presence. Yeah. So if this episode encouraged you, share it with a mom who might need it today. And don't forget you can read more about this topic, including what it actually looks like to be here, to be there with the crying, in Dr. Tash's article on momsatthetable.com. As before, we'd love to hear from you. Send your thoughts, reflections, or parenting questions to hello@momsatthetable.com. And we'll see you next month on Mom to Mom with Dr. Tash. Thanks, Dr. Tash.
Thanks, Melody. Bye.